Welcome to a special In the Money Players podcast. This focusing on Sunday's New York Showcase Day at Saratoga. Nick Tammaro here, joined by David Aragona, morning line maker for the New York Racing Association and from the DRF and TimeformUS. David, always fun to get together to talk about some horses that we get to grow a lot of familiarity with as time goes by.
Yeah, great to join you to talk about this New York bred card. We're very familiar with these horses racing throughout the year in New York. There's an entire stakes series for them, and it's great to have them all converge on one card at Saratoga.
Yeah, and we would be remiss in not discussing, and this point is made, of course, on multiple occasions, as it should be, the proliferation of the New York bred program, which has really grown incredibly. And to think that it was 20 years ago that Funny Cide won the Kentucky Derby, and I know there's going to be a little bit of a ceremony done at the racetrack on Sunday. It's unbelievable to me that much time has gone by, and that was really, I think, the general public's first blush with how strong the New York bred program had become. And I think thinking back on it now and what's gone on since with the way that New York breds have performed so powerfully, it's a program that's still on the rise.
Yeah, growing up as a fan of Funny Cide, it was so great to see him compete on those biggest of stages. And we've seen a lot of New York breds able to compete in graded stakes races, grade ones over the past few years. It's not so much of an anomaly anymore, and that's great to see.
No, for sure. I mean, you think about Haynesfield and other horses that were grade one winners over the years that I really grew a lot of appreciation for. The other thing is that, we've seen some of the turf horses especially stick around for so long, had these battles in the division. I know the King Creesa, Lou Bash period of time was always a lot of fun as well. And I felt like I was on the wrong side of the majority of those. But what I will say in addition is that we want to thank Najah Thompson from the New York Thoroughbred Breeders for his sponsorship here before we get started, at least, and say that the New York Thoroughbred Breeders is an organization dedicated to the advancement of the New York bred program across the breeding and racing industries. Part of the New York bred growth includes $181 million in total purses per year, with membership incentives, including the monthly New York Breeder magazine, free entrance to any NYRA facility, and discounts through NTRA Advantage. Now's the time to join the NYTB. For more information, go to www.nytbreeders.org/membership. So now that we've done all of the housekeeping stuff, David, we can dig into the actual fun part of it, which is the handicapping. And the first of the stakes races on this card goes as race number 2, the Fleet Indian. Not much in terms of field size, and probably not a Fleet Indian that we'll end up remembering for many, many years to come, with a compact field made up primarily of 2 horses from the barn of Linda Rice, taking on Timely Conquest, Mark Hennig's entrant, who you made a 7-5 morning line favorite. Where did you land here, and do you trust Timely Conquest at this 9 furlong trip?
Yeah, I think there are cases to be made for 4 of the 5 runners. I've been a fan of the number 2 Crystal Air in some maiden races, but she's a little tough to make in this spot. Timely Conquest definitely comes in as the horse to beat off that big speed figure last time, but she's turning around pretty quickly. She just ran a top effort 16 days ago. Feels like they're taking a shot here, because why not? The race came up a little bit soft. It's a $200,000 purse. You got to take advantage of these races when your horses are in good form. I just feel like, for me, she's a bet against in this race. I know she's by Accelerate, but on the dam side, it's a bit more sprint pedigree. She's a half-sister to Euphoric, who is much more of a dirt sprinter. Watching her races, I don't necessarily get route vibes from her, so I tended to trust the 2 Linda Rice horses more to get the distance, but I was actually most interested in the number 3, Cairo Sugar, who has an experience edge on all of these. She's the most experienced going a route of ground, especially 2 turns. She ran pretty well at Parks last time against some seasoned older rivals, albeit not with the fastest speed figure, but I just think a horse like this coming in is trustworthy. She's going to get the distance, and these connections have sent some live runners to New York, especially going back to the winter at Aqueduct.
Yeah, and including when she won the Mattie May at almost 28-1. I agree. I picked Cairo Sugar as well. I thought her last race was probably, I don't want to say it was better than it looks on paper, because it wasn't. And those horses are relatively slow. The runner-up did come back and win, but our buyer figure also dropped 12 points. But this is one of those situations where I really don't care really what speed figure that race got, because this race is going to get a low speed figure. Unless somehow, and it would probably happen without our support, unless Timely Conquest can get the distance. And if she does, then she'll likely just wire the field, and that'll be that. But you have to bet against it, in my opinion, especially with her drifting likely below 2-1. I thought Cairo Sugar could at least be. I like that she rated comfortably as well, and I think if she can sit a little bit off the pace, getting Flavian Pratt obviously is no big issue there. And her as the fourth choice, to me, felt like the best betting proposition by a mile in that first stake race. The Fleet Indy and anything else in there, I think we covered pretty much all the bases.
Yeah, I mean, of the two Linda Rices, I probably preferred Ichiban just slightly, but it's a tough call. And both of them were running at times when Linda Rice's barn was just on fire. Everything was running. So you have to wonder if those horses are going to be able to duplicate those efforts from early in the meet.
Yeah, and I thought Amanda's Folly would probably get a little overbet because people are going to see Sweet Mystery running second and coming back and winning, and IRAD as well. I tend to agree with you. I thought Ichiban's win was probably a little bit more impressive, albeit against a weaker field, no doubt about it. I know April Antics, of course, came back and won as well. April Antics did move probably a tad prematurely in that race before being run down, and still what's one of the most mystifying races I've ever watched. They showed the replay on Talking Horses the other day, and I was like, there's still no way she's going to win this race. And she did. But Ichiban, of course, the horse that was coming back in 11 days to win that one, other than when she caught April Antics in the final stride. So, I would say, I mean, and you obviously captured it perfectly in terms of the odds, with Amanda's Folly likely to get a lot of money. No chance Amanda's Folly's favorite in here, right? Though I think the 86 buyer of Timely Conquest is probably a little too much.
It's possible. I wouldn't be shocked just due to the power of the connections. Mark Hennig, or just a barn that generally doesn't take as much money, but that horse, Timely Conquest, does have a big speed figure advantage.
Yeah, no doubt about it. That's the Fleet Indian. Let's go on to the West Point, which I think is just a really terrific race and brings together a somewhat compact field, but it's basically all you would expect in this New York bred turf division. And you want to talk about horses that have competed against open company effectively. Included in here is recent allowance winner Jerry the Nipper, but also graded stake winner City Man, who took last year's Forbidden Apple and the Fort Lauderdale, en route to being favored in the Pegasus World Cup turf. City Man comes back now off a brief layoff after winning the Kingston. Dakota Gold has also been a very strong New York bred competitor for quite some time. I don't know how much I want to bet this race, David, but I really can't wait to see how it unfolds.
I really hope it holds together. Reading the DRF Stakes preview for this race, Christophe Clement was maybe throwing some cold water on City Man running here, because you'll notice there are two Reeves Thoroughbred racing horses in here, Dakota Gold and City Man, with common ownership, and kind of alluding to the fact that maybe they didn't want to hook up in the starting gate, even though they're going out for two different barns as far as trainers are concerned. I mean, among those that have been familiar in this division, City Man is the horse to beat. I do wonder if he's maybe lost a step just looking at some of his recent starts. I mean, he was in a razor sharp form last year at Saratoga when he won that Forbidden Apple. And sure, he had an excuse in the Pegasus World Cup, just going wide every step of the way. But I thought he was supposed to finish second in the Fort Marcy. That was kind of a bad loss for me, because he had a great trip in that race and couldn't even pick up Tie to the Sea. And then last time had to work pretty hard in the Kingston, when I thought Dakota Gold maybe ran the better race, getting held up in traffic at the top of the stretch. So between the two Reeves Thoroughbred racing horses, I kind of did prefer Dakota Gold if they both end up running. But I think the horse you have to make some decisions about is the number 6, Spirit of St. Louis, because he's the new face in this division, and he has looked awfully good in those two turf races.
Yeah, and I noticed, and I've considered this to some extent on different occasions, but one of the knocks on Chad Brown over the last few years had been that when he was switching horses off of Lasix and stakes races, he actually had struggled with it. In the last 8 months, he's 24% with a 276 ROI, and it's not really been a concern at all. Spirit of St. Louis is a horse with a tremendous damn side pedigree. You couldn't really do a show talking about New York breds or New York Thoroughbred breeders without mentioning the Bromans, who oddly later on in the show, I'll mention something about them specifically. But this is a horse with a damn side that does include Bar of Gold, but that's all turf. And this horse has basically exploded since moving to the turf. He was an impressive debut winner. And then the second place finish to Olympic Dreams obviously looks better now that we've seen Olympic Dreams as a New York bred stake horse. He's been very good in his last two starts. He didn't have a straw in his path last time, but he at least took advantage of that and won pretty powerfully. Irad, of course, rides a lot for Chad. He rides a lot for Good Connections. He sees fit to go here after riding Dakota Gold in a number of stakes wins. I mean, you made him the favorite. I think he's going to be the favorite. I don't know if I want him as the favorite, but he's a horse who I think could win this race comfortably. or I wouldn't be surprised if he runs third.
Yeah, I was kind of struggling with this line, and I felt like I was going out on a bit of a limb making this horse the favorite, but he just feels like the kind of horse a lot of people are not going to be able to resist off those impressive victories.
Yeah.
As you said, Irad Ortiz choosing him. I know a lot of people put a lot of stock in that stuff and their handicapping. So at that price, he's not the kind of horse that I personally would want to bet, but I do think he's dangerous in this race. I'll just jump to the horse that I ended up picking in this race, and that's the number 1, Some Like It Hot Brown. And some people might say he's over the hill, that, we've seen his best days and they're long since gone, but he is always a horse that is pretty rusty when he comes back off the layoff. If you look back at his past performances over the years, when Mike Maker brings him back off the layoff, he just needs a few starts to shake off the rust. And that was definitely the case this year. He was just pretty dull when he came back in that Kingston, but I thought he showed some signs of life last time in that Hudson Valley, because Mike Maker had 2 horses in there, one of which was the very speedy Call Me Harry, who served as a pace setter in that race, or just a horse that they're never going to rate. And it seemed like they just made the decision to rate Some Like It Hot Brown that day, so those two didn't tangle on the front end. And maybe they overdid it a little bit because he ended up towards the back of the pack, but he's never been a horse that's been effective using that kind of running style as a deep closer. And he actually put in a pretty good late run to be second to Dakota Gold. Didn't run nearly as well as that horse, but I just thought it was a big step in the right direction for a horse that obviously at one time showed the talent to be competitive with the likes of Dakota Gold and City Man. And I just think third off the layoff, we're likely to see a better effort. There's really not much speed signed on in this race outside of Jerry the Nipper, who's not exactly a confirmed front runner. So I could see them going from the rail and potentially trying to wire this field.
Yeah, grade 2 winner himself, having taken the Bernard Baruch over this turf course back in 2020. I wondered what they would do tactically. My concern is that he ran as well as he did last time out when they dragged him out of the race altogether, and that it would become we need to take him back and let him make one run because that worked last time. But this just seems too obvious, right? He has to go to the lead. There's no other confirmed speed, as you said. I picked Jerry the Nipper. That'll be it for him because I've never really embraced him. Now that I've picked him, he'll probably he'll exit stage left, right? But he's a horse who's been remarkably consistent as well. I mean, he doesn't really have the stakes accomplishments that some of these other horses do in terms of winning, but he's consistently run well. And I thought his win last time out was pretty game. He probably took the worst of it in terms of the pace flow in there, race flow, I should say, with Kuramada having a pretty ideal trip. And Easter came back and ran very well the other day, even if he was beaten. But, this is a race where I think you can make a pretty strong case for 5 of the 6 horses. I can't quite make Ocala Dream, but, we've spoken only referencing Dakota Gold. This is a horse who's a multiple New York bred stake winner who comes in off a narrow miss in an open company race. So I understand it was restricted, but it was still not for New York breds. And he ran very well last time out in the Lure. I think it would hardly surprise if he gets in there.
Yeah, we've seen Mike Maker have success with some of these claims that look a little counterintuitive on paper, and stepping this horse up in class aggressively. Can't totally discount it, but I agree. Not one I can make a case for at a big price.
I wonder if he's a horse that Maker thinks might want to go longer. I mean, and let me tell you, Maker's done unbelievable things with horses going long on the turf. Winning a grade 1 at a 1 3/8 with Therapist is probably the most amazing I've ever seen. I mean, that is a horse that a lot of people, including me, were clamoring for going shorter. I bet him in the Belmont Turf Sprint Championship a couple of years ago because I thought 6 furlongs would hit him right between the eyes. But yeah, we'll see what he ends up doing with Ocala Dream. He's one that's a little tough to figure in here. But that is a good look at the West Point, the second of the stakes races on Sunday's card. Let's go to the Funny Cide, the aforementioned 2003 Kentucky Derby and Preakness winner, 2-year-olds at 6 furlongs on the main track. David, where did you land here?
This is a really competitive race. I mean, I guess the number 2, Always a Warrior, a little tough to make a case for just based on how slow his debut speed figure came back. But the other 5, I mean, there's something to recommend about all of them. I mean, I guess the Wine Steward kind of is the horse to beat coming back out of the Bashford Manor. Thought the horse he beat in there, Wilson Q, was actually pretty good. And this horse has been visually impressive in both career starts. The son of Vino Rosso, and he's got this big stride on him, almost moves more like a turf horse, but he's definitely running well on the dirt right now. We'll see how he does here because there are some runners in here that have run some faster speed figures than he has. I ended up going to the rail with the number 1, El Grande O. His last race in the Skidmore, going back to the dirt, I think is a race that you kind of have to, make some decisions about because the buyer came back low. I was having a discussion about this race with my colleague, Craig Milkowski, who makes the TimeformUS speed figures. And he was kind of making the point that sometimes those 5.5 furlong races play a little bit differently at Saratoga. And he thought that the this race should be broken out, get a higher speed figure. So you'll notice El Grandeo is coming in with the highest TimeformUS speed figure of anybody in this field off that performance last time. And I can't totally disagree with Craig, because I think Ship Cadet and Seize the Gray are both nice horses. And El Grandeo had to briefly pause at the quarter pole when he was making his move that day, finished up pretty well. And also his debut when he finished behind the Wine Steward is a much better effort than it appears on paper. He was just out for some education that day, like most Linda Rice firsters are. He had a steady coming out of the starting gate, was pretty tentatively ridden after that, but was finishing up decently. I mean, I know there's turf pedigree on the dam side, but he's by Take Charge Indy. I don't mind both of his dirt races, and Linda Rice has amazing numbers bringing horses back on short rest. 6 to 12 days, if you look it up in Formulator, she wins at 30% in a 152 horse sample with a 245 ROI. So I think El Grandeo is going to get somewhat overlooked in this race, and it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, there's a big track speed change late in the card that day on the buyer scale, and I think that probably contributed a bit to the figure, of course. And those are always tricky. It was a day also where there had been some rain, and I think the track probably went from being a little wetter to being a little drier, especially as the sun came out. You mentioned the quick rest, and that's been a very strong angle for Linda Rice over some time. We'll see what El Grandeo has to offer. I was a little more obvious. I mean, I thought the race was primarily between the two on the outside. I don't have a problem with El Grandeo at all. I just think he's got to work out a trip from the inside. It does seem like a race, though, where the speed horses will stretch them out a bit, and I think that'll help a horse that wants to come from off of it, like El Grandeo. The Wine Steward, as you mentioned, beat Wilson Q, who was a pretty solid debut winner for Doug O'Neill, and came into that race as the favorite. Call Me Andy, who ran third, came back and ran third in a juvenile race at Ellis Park. So the form of that race has held up relatively well. Feels like a horse who should get a good outside stalking trip. Trust Fund was an impressive debut winner for Todd Pletcher, and connections that we're very familiar with, Eclipse Thoroughbred Partners from Rapoli Stable. This horse looks like one that with plenty of upside as well. I wouldn't be surprised if he comes right back and wins again.
Yeah, I was kind of laughing when this horse won his debut, because he showed up on the track with blinkers, and I kind of tweeted out a stat when this horse showed up on the track with blinkers about how Todd Pletcher has abysmally bad numbers debuting horses that are wearing blinkers. And of course, after I sent out that stat, he won the race. But Todd Pletcher's bringing this horse back on relatively short rest, which is somewhat uncharacteristic of him, not waiting around. Like we said, you've got to take advantage of these New York bred spots when you've got horses that are ready to run. But Todd Pletcher also does not have great numbers bringing horses back off debut victories in stakes races at Saratoga in general. So I kind of downgraded him a little bit.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I thought that this was. I also questioned that field a tad. That was, if I remember correctly, that was a race that was brought back from either I think it was the race that got canceled. Perhaps I might even be getting that wrong. That may have been a maiden auction race.
It was a different race. Yeah,
it was one of the problems that I had with this horse was that a horse like that. And there was a Chad Brown runner in his debut that took a ton of money. I thought this horse was sort of cold on the board, and if I remember correctly, he wasn't really training all that great. But we'll see. I don't know if I want to take this horse as the favorite. I think there's more of an opportunity in here with the Wine Steward if he's a little bit lesser price. So that is a look at the Funny Cide, which is the third stake race. Now he was actually training fine. I'm not. It's early. So anyway, moving on to race number 5, the Yaddo at 1 1/16 on the Mellon Turf Course. We have older fillies and mares going postward in here, and we've seen a little bit of a changing of the guard in this division a couple of times. The only horse who continues to stick around, at least now, is Runaway Rumor, and Runaway Rumor is a horse you want to talk about going in and out of form. It seems like she's done that 2 or 3 times in her career. Is she finished? I don't think she's done really any running in her last 2 starts.
I like Runaway Rumor quite a bit in this race, actually. I mean, it's not the strongest field that you're ever going to get at this level. I mean, she's obviously faced better stakes fields in the past. And when you start to pick apart her last few races, okay, the most damning of those is the Mount Vernon, because she was supposed to win that race. She kind of had it won and just lost to Marvelous Maud. But then she came back in that Port Washington. I know she lost as the 1-5 favorite. That was a yielding turf course. they rode her kind of like she couldn't lose. Manny Franco elected to forego cover on the far turn and just let her sit out 3 wide, going around horses. And she just kind of, I think her move just kind of dissipated as she raced out in the clear, and she wasn't able to make that run. If you kind of go through her past performances, she needs to be held up early and then make that run. When she's sort of forced to go into that stalking position, that's when she doesn't finish. So I'm not going to hold that race against her too much. And then last time in the Della Rose, she had no chance to close. I mean, that was a race that was just dominated on the front end. We saw a horse who had a very similar trip in that race, Evie Jets, come back and cause a huge upset in the Grade 2 Ballston Spa earlier this week. So I think Runaway Rumors had excuses, and I'm not even convinced she's going to be favored in this race with a horse like What Loves Looks Like's coming in off a win streak. So I put Runaway Rumor on top. I don't totally trust her. How can you? But I do think she's dirtied up.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the point about the Port Washington really is the best one, which is that you ask a horse like this to make a prolonged bid when they're essentially a one-run closer. That's a recipe for disaster. And I thought, I guess Marvelous Maud is hurt. I didn't even think about that. But as you mentioned, the Mount Vernon with her losing by a nose, it was again a situation where I think Manny may have asked her to prolong that bid. And this is a horse that, if you remember back to the 21 Belmont day when she won her second career start, she made this big sweeping move around the outside going, I think she was sprinting on the turf, on the Widener turf course. And Ricardo Santana Jr. rode her that day, and he's back in the irons. He's done some of his, he's got the lone winner that Horacio De Paz has had at the meet. He's had some bad luck as well, but I agree. I mean, I've always liked her. I really hope that she still has a bullet in the chamber at least. I did think there were some interesting horses that were going to be relatively decent prices. You referenced What Love Looks Like, who's likely going to end up going off the favorite, a multi-race winning streak now, including an open company win last time out, albeit at 1 3/8. I don't really know how much credit I want to necessarily give her for that. What you can say is that she's still an improving horse. But what do you do with a horse like She's Dancing for Flint Stites, who it took 16 races to get this horse onto the turf, a war dancer that finally made her turf debut last time out? And I looked at about every speed figure I could find, and they all held up pretty well. That was a fast race where she just absolutely walloped them.
I remember this horse ran at Aqueduct, I think 1 or 2 times in like her second or third career starts, because she had won her debut at Delaware. And I remember when I was handicapping that race thinking to myself, wow, this horse has a big turf stride on her, but they're running around the dirt. It's the winter time. I get it. And then I just kind of forgot about her and obviously was not paying attention when she finally got on the turf at 12-1 last time at Penn National. But I mean, watching that race, that was a serious performance. I mean, she had so much in hand coming around the far turn. The jockey just couldn't stop her from opening up at that point in the race. And she won so easily. 8-9 buyer, that's arguably conservative. I mean, Craig gave her a 120 TimeformUS speed figure, which is open company, maybe graded stakes level performance. Oh, yeah. We'll see if she can run back to it here. What I will say is, as you go through this field, there's really not that much pace signed on. And I guess What Love Looks Like has some speed, but she's not exactly one that's going to be gunning for the front end. And it feels like She's Dancing is going to have an opportunity to control things on the lead, and that makes her especially dangerous.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's exactly it, is the pace scenario where it does feel like she's going to establish the lead, as you said, and there's nobody in here who can really keep up. We don't even really know how fast she is on the front end, too. I mean, that was a situation where, from a pace figure perspective, I thought she ran. Now, Craig coded the first fraction blue, but it didn't matter because she just accelerated as the race went on, which you don't really expect to see all that often. I've been skeptical in the past of a Grantville turf form, but I don't know. This horse looks like one that I think is pretty dangerous. I picked her on top, and a little bit of it was because I don't necessarily trust some of the other horses that are going to take money. And I do like Spongy as well, but I just think she's going to need a race off the layoff. She's a filly that won her second start of 2022 off a long break. She's always had talent. She's just been unable to really put it all together and stay on the racetrack.
Yeah, I like Spongy. Just feels like a horse that needed a race last year. I wonder if the same is going to be true this year.
Could end up landing in the Ticonderoga down the line on a New York Showcase Day during the Belmont at Aqueduct meet. Let's go to race number 7, the Seeking the Ante for 2-year-old fillies going 6 furlongs on the main track. We've got a field of 6 here, and Horacio De Paz and Larry Goichman, who of course have Runaway Rumor as the favorite in the Yaddo, will have a pretty solid favorite here in the 6, Stella Maris. Did you think it was just as simple as Stella Maris getting into New York Bred Company as a second-time starter, or were you elsewhere?
I mean, she is the only maiden in this field, but she's got a speed figure on debut that unquestionably makes her the horse to beat in this race. She was touted that day for Horacio de Paz Firster to go off at 9-5. I mean, that's taking serious money, regardless of what you're facing in an open company maiden race at Saratoga. The one thing I'll say about Stella Maris is I'm a little concerned about the turn back, because watching the way she was training for her debut and watching that debut, she gives me the vibe of a horse that's ultimately going to want to go longer than this. And going back to 6 furlongs, I just wonder if she's going to get outrun a little bit too much, because she didn't have much speed that day. She just kind of stayed on at one pace and got second. I think she's pretty good, but I wonder if this is the ideal kind of distance for her. So, I mean, there are some others to consider. I mean, Kara's Time, probably tough to make just off her slow speed figure on debut, but you can say some positive things about everybody else in this field. I think My Shady Lady is dangerous coming in from Gulfstream for Carlos David. She was pretty impressive, also beating Open Company on debut, though that was just a 5 furlong race. And then the number 1, Caldwell Loves Gold. That's where I went. I know that she got a slow speed figure in her first start, but she showed a lot of likable attributes that day. I mean, she was off slowly, was just kind of taken in hand at the start. And it's not every day that you see a horse make a last to first move in a 9-horse field on debut at Saratoga, but that's what she did. She was just relentless, making that big run through the stretch. And I don't think so much of the horses she beat that day. I also don't care that much, because I feel like she really did show ability. And if you look up the stats in Formulator of Brad Cox coming back off a debut win for a second start on dirt, the numbers are off the charts. I think he's 23 for 53 with an ROI that's nearly $3. I mean, he just wins with these horses, and I think this filly could have a step forward in her second time out.
Yeah, one of the interesting things from a race flow perspective, too, about her debut is that you're inclined to think, when you look at the running line and you see a little bit of red in the TimeformUS pace line, that it was a race that either collapsed or was run at a frenetic early clip. The pace was a little bit faster than par. Nobody else moved from off the pace at all. Mm-hmm. She was the only horse who did any running from deep in the pack that day, and I thought that was a reason to upgrade her a little bit as well. You also referenced that, the speed figure does look on the slow side, but again, I mean, we're at a time where these horses are either going more distance for the first time or running for the first time period, and I think in terms of speed figures themselves, and being a speed figure devotee, I feel fine saying this, that these are the figures that you take with a grain of salt more than pretty much any other ones. I agree with you. Caldwell Loves Gold, very dangerous from the inside. We'll see if Stella Maris improves off of that debut. She's back on relatively short rest as well, coming back 2 weeks after that unveiling, which was the opener on Sunday, August 13th. The 5 Concerti won on opening weekend for Joe Sharp. Won the opener on that Friday. This horse looks like the main speed on paper. I guess we'll see how much Jose Lascano rides Kara's Time. She felt like a horse to me, though, when all was said and done, that was going to be a little overbet.
Yeah, with Irad getting aboard her, we'll see what we get from a wagering standpoint. Also, her last workout that I watched on August 20th really bothered me, because she was under the whip trying to stay with an unraced horse that I have seen train before and didn't think very much of. So I'm a little concerned about how she's been training out of that race.
There you go. That's very, very good info, of course. And you can definitely get the DRF Clocker report, which will be available Saturday night once you've completed your Travers Day activities. That is race number 7, the Seeking the Ante. And interestingly enough, going to race number 10, the Albany. Seeking the Ante is the second dam of Albany morning line favorite Mariachi, which should be no surprise, of course, given the strength of the Broman's breeding program. So we will talk now about this 3-year-old event at 1 1/8. And I thought this was a fun race as well, David, in large part because I'm skeptical of the 2 Makers Candy wanting 1 1/8. I know it seems idiotic to say that a Mike Maker horse doesn't ultimately want more distance, but he doesn't have only route horses in his barn. And this horse was supposed to beat Allure of Money last time. I know he had a tougher trip with a bump at the start, but he did not finish to me like a horse that I wanted to necessarily bet right back at 9 furlongs, especially when you compare him to a horse like Drake's Passage, who I don't know whether it was the time away, the growing up, the maturation, the Lasix, but he looked great last time out, winning an open company or winning a New York bred race that should set him up very well to go the 1 1/8 here, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you've got three really talented New York breds in this race in the 2, 4, and 6. And the separator is the distance. I mean, when you look at them, the only one that you can make a really strong case wants the 9 furlongs is Drake's Passage. I mean, he's by tonalist and got plenty of stamina on the dam side. The obviously horse they've targeted at route races right from the start, starting him out in the turf race going 2 turns last year. And I mean, the only concerning thing for me is that he took no money when he came off the layoff last time. So I was wondering if he wasn't training well or something. I mean, 15-1 seemed crazy on a horse like that, just given what we typically see with routine maturity from 2-year-old to 3-year-old season. But he was ready to go. I mean, he beat a horse that was in great form in Ciccio Bello and Colloquy, who came back to win out of that race with a similar speed figure. I think it validates the number a little bit. And stretching out to the 9 furlongs, it doesn't look like it's going to be a problem for this horse. And I do have some concerns, like you said, about Maker's Candy going longer. Maker's Candy has this tendency to drift out in the stretch of his races, which I think is partly what got him beat last time, because Jose Ortiz was trying to keep him engaged with the lure of Bunny through the stretch. And at about the 8th pole, he started to do that, drifting a little bit and disengaged from the other horse. And it just seemed like he couldn't get the job done and almost, lost focus on that runner. Going longer with him, I'm not crazy about it. I mean, I think the most naturally talented horse in this race might be Mariachi, but this is a big ask going from sprint races all the way out to a mile and an eighth. He's really good, but this is a tall order.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to beat up on a trainer like John Kimmel, but stretching out on the dirt, 3 for 36 with a 56-cent ROI, it's just hard to believe this horse is going to get better with significantly more ground. And I do think Kendrick is going to do his very best to just nurse him along on the front end. But the question you have to ask yourself there is, I mean, do you really think the Finger Lakes connections are bringing Allure of Money over so that he can rate? I mean, I imagine they're going to take advantage of being drawn towards the inside and try and win that race to the first turn. So I'm certainly not going to be so bold as to predict a hot pace. I've learned to not do that on a regular basis, but I do think it's going to be contested enough to really keep Mariachi from being able to handle this. And I'm skeptical of his ability to win this race rating from a little bit farther off of it. I agree completely that his talent-wise, I do think he's the best horse in the race. Is there any chance for a horse like Jackson Heights to clunk up and get a piece of this? I don't really know if he's good enough to win, but I think the distance question is one you don't have to ask yourself there. And he didn't necessarily have the biggest setup last time out when he ended up second in one other then.
He's just this big lumbering plotter that has no speed at all. And I mean, he took a long time to get going last time. Like you said, the pace not in his favor, but he was beaten a long way by Colloquy, who Drake's Passage just dusted in his prior start. So it feels like he's a cut below these, but he could pick up pieces. He'll get the distance.
Yeah, he's that was also a relatively weak field. That was a weak one other than top to bottom, and Colloquy was simply a lot better than them on paper. I didn't really have much of a case to be made for anybody else in here. Was there did you ultimately pick Drake's Passage?
I picked Drake's Passage. I mean, part of me wanted to make a case for Mariachi because I think he's so talented. It's just the wrong distance.
Yeah, if this was a mile at Aqueduct or Belmont, I think there really wouldn't be as much of a concern about the distance. But, going the mile and eighth at Saratoga is such a demanding trip, and one where Mariachi will have to be at his very best in order to get it. Well, one other race we wanted to touch on this card was the 9th, which is a turf sprint at 5.5 furlongs on the Mellon turf course. David, what did you think of this affair?
This is a really fun race. I mean, I guess a horse like the number 1 Weekend Rags is one that a lot of horse players are going to land on, just based on the fact that, she's hit the board twice at this level with respectable speed figures, was beaten by a good horse, actually, in each of her last 2 starts, in Lisa's Vision and Loon Cry. She makes plenty of sense, but I thought this was a super competitive race where you can go in a number of directions. And I was kind of stuck, among a few horses, but I was narrowing it down and deciding who would be the best value. One of them was the number 8 Carey, who I just think is getting some class relief and also turning back to turf sprinting is what she really wants to do. She showed some ability in that second start of her career when she first got on turf last year. That's a nice speed figure for a 2-year-old. And after that, they tried some tougher spots against Open Company. Getting back in a turf sprint against New York breds is supposed to be what she wants to do. So I think she's somewhat interesting in here. The horse that I put on top, though, was actually the number 3 Saratoga Gaze. I thought she ran deceptively well in that opening day turf sprint up here. That was a race that completely fell apart. The winner, Diva Reddy, came from off the pace. The runner-up, Liner Right, who's also in here, just was picking up pieces at the end, closing from far back. And Saratoga Gaze was dueling with a pace rival that day that she put away at the top of the stretch. That horse faded to finish nowhere. And Saratoga Gaze opened up on the field and just barely got nailed at the very end. That was a deceptively strong effort, turning back to sprinting on turf. And Mark Hennig and Dylan Davis, they're not connections that have taken a lot of money at this meet, but they've been having a lot of success. So I think she's going to be the right price.
Yeah, Mark Hennig probably watched that race and thought, great, here was my opportunity on opening day to get a win. I had a horse with a wide lead at the 8th pole and ended up running 3rd. And who knew that he would end up winning 8 races shortly thereafter? I agree. I actually picked her that day and thought, that there was going to be sort of a steer job in mid-stretch before that happened, but it's okay. It happens. I agree. I think she's a major player here. I know that You Should Be Dancing got a bit of a setup last time too, but I do think that she ran an improved race, and I could make a case for her also. I wish you could get a bit better price as well. You mentioned Weekend Rags, who was a good second behind Loon Cry last time out at 6 furlongs at Belmont. She was probably put at a bit of a disadvantage at the post draw, getting the rail. She's a horse I think would probably prefer to chase on the outside. I mean, wouldn't they all in many ways? But I think she could find herself a little under the gun here on the inside in what ends up being a pretty tough event top to bottom.
Yeah, I was also trying to make a case for the number 6, Danseur Doro, who I've kind of always thought has a little bit of a turf look to her, and she's run some of her best races on sealed, wet racetracks. There is turf pedigree on the dam side or dam one on the turf. A lot of synthetic pedigree in there too, which sometimes can translate to the turf. So she's one that I'm a little bit interested in for the very dangerous Bill Morey barn, but couldn't quite pull the trigger at a big price.
Yeah, agreed. One that you might try and sneak in there in some capacity at 15-1. Well, that is a look at the Saratoga New York Bred Showcase Day. It'll be a very fun day of racing. 11 races on tap, all in all, to cap the Travers Day week and to get us into the final week of the Saratoga meet. David, thank you so much for joining me. Always fun looking at these races, and glad to have had you do it alongside.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks again to David and everybody out there, all the In the Money Media Plus subscribers and everybody in the Money Media Network. Be sure to rate, likes, and subscribe, and check out all the content we have there at inthemoneypodcast.com. Until next time, best of luck.